Welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Zone. I'm your co-host, Tom Spitalere. Today, Bob is out on special assignment. He'll be back next week. The Paranormal Zone was started to look at different angles of what we call the paranormal, or cryptozoology, ghost hunting, psychics, Wiccans, ufology, and bring in different views of it, because you put a room full of people in the paranormal, you're going to get a room full of different answers to the same question. Same with cryptozoology, same with ufology, and it's just the way it is. So we want to bring a voice to all these people. So that's what we're doing this for. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in from here from the James R. Ross Memorial Studios in haunted Lawrence, Massachusetts, to Canada, to Mexico, and across the Great Divide, and across the pond to England. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Tonight's guest is a very interesting fellow. I've known this guy for quite a few years now. Slevik. He's an author, storyteller, and UFO researcher. Welcome, Noma.
Hey, Tom, thanks so much for having me.
No problem. I mean, we've had people from England on, but you take the cake. You're the first person we had from the Great North Woods of Maine, known as the Pine Tree State.
Awesome.
So that's pretty cool. So we'll get into your author stuff in a little bit as we go on, because you've published 6 or 7 books. And I think UFO researcher pretty much explains it all, but what's storyteller?
Well, I like to do events, either at, a library or a conference, and I like to share the stories that I write about. Whether it's a UFO story or something about werewolves or even a haunting, I tell stories of all kinds, but my specialty is certainly extraterrestrial in nature. But yeah, storyteller is simply, I like to tell stories to people.
Okay, that pretty much sums that one up. I know another great guy that likes to tell stories too. He's written over 1,000 of them.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, his name's Fritz Weatherby.
Okay.
He's written historical stories, though. He was on Chronicle. He still is. He has a little show called, it talks about little towns in New Hampshire. It's a 3-minute segment at the end of New Hampshire Chronicle. It's pretty cool.
That's
Sometimes
awesome.
He talks about Bigfoot. Sometimes he talks about ghosts, especially the week leading up to Halloween. He's got a lot of ghost stories to tell. And UFO stories, because he's told the Betty and Bonnie Hill story I don't know how many times.
I'm sure plenty, being from that area.
Yeah. So, as far as stories are concerned, I mean, we've had Mike Stevens, who brought the Benny and Bonnie Hill story back to life, as you know, bringing that historic marker. Now, up in northern Maine, are there any stories similar to Benny and Bonnie Hill that we can talk about?
Absolutely. There's a pretty substantial encounter and abduction that happened in 75, so we're probably, what is that, 15 years after Betty and Barney Hill, give or take a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 4 gentlemen. They were college students. 2 of them were brothers, twin brothers to be exact. And they're from Massachusetts, and they traveled up to the Allagash Wilderness Waterway in northern Maine for spring break, and they wanted to come up and fish and live off the land and have a bunch of fun in Maine.
That's interesting. I think nothing against the state of Maine, but I think that's the last place I'd go during spring break.
Right. I think I would agree with you there.
I mean, but that's great. So they went up to Allagash, which in 1975, that's no man's land today, but I bet it was really nomadic up there in 75.
Yeah, I can imagine. It was like that. And, and they had fun their first couple days. They did a whole bunch of fishing, and they even had to take little plane rides to get to the different areas to camp, and they got some aerial views of the lakes that are up there. And so they're having a good time. And there was this one night where they were staying at a campsite. There's a whole bunch of other people staying there. And it got to be early evening, 6, 7 o'clock, and the sun is still up, but it's setting. And they started to notice this light in the sky, and it was unnatural. It wasn't the moon. And more people started to notice it, to the point where everybody was basically looking up at this strange round light. And after a little while, it kind of just blinked out. And everybody kind of went back to what they were doing. They were barbecuing. There were still kids in the water, and nobody really thought about it too much. But a few later, these 4 men in particular were in another remote area. They had their own campsite. There was nobody else there, and they were running really low on protein, and they needed to go fishing. Tried their hand at it all day long, and they just weren't having any luck. And they wasn't sure if it was the area, maybe it'd been fished too much the day before or something, but they wanted to try their hand at night fishing because they were just out of protein. So they decided to light a big bonfire so they could find their way back to their campsite after they were done fishing. So they went around and did pretty large pieces of wood and tree, and some of them were log sized, and they created this big bonfire, and then they all went out on a canoe together. While they're out there, they see that same light from a couple of nights before, but it's just them and the light now. There's nobody else around. After a moment, this light, according to them, shoots down this beam of light, and it's hitting the water almost like a searchlight. And it almost seems like it's chasing them. So they start canoeing and paddling as fast as they can to try to get away from this thing. The light's gaining on them. They know they can't outrun it. And then the next thing they know, they're back on shore. 3 of them are standing on the shore, and one of them is still sitting in the canoe, which has been pulled up onto shore. The light is still there in the sky. And it kind of hovers for a minute. A searchlight, that beam of light or whatever, kind of retracts back up into it, and then it shoots off and disappears. They're all kind of groggy. They don't know what's happened. They turn around, and their bonfire is ashes and embers. It wasn't burning anymore, which said to them that they'd been gone for quite some time. And they didn't quite know what to do other than go sit at the picnic table and kind of fall asleep. They were so lethargic. They still had close to a week left of their trip. And they kind of went through the motions, but they weren't having fun anymore. And they didn't really know why. But they were, lethargic for a few days, and then almost, acting like robots, if you will, but trying to have a good time at the same time. But there was this sense of dread, or something was different, or something was wrong, but they didn't know what it was. Mm-hmm. Then they go back home, and they go back to school, and then they go back to their lives, and, some of them get married, and, they're starting their jobs, and they, move to different areas of Massachusetts. I think 2 others moved out of state. And it wasn't until a whole lot of years later where one of the people that was on that trip started having these really strange dreams. And he would be dreaming that he was surrounded by these weird creatures, and they were examining him, and he would wake up in a puddle of sweat. And this was one of them that was a brother to another. He was one of the twins. So he talked to his brother, and turns out his brother was having similar dreams. And but the gentleman who kind of initiated was also medical issues and was having some seizures. And it was really scaring him. So he told his doctors about what was happening with these dreams and stuff. And the doctor actually recommended that he talk to a UFO expert. And that turned out to be Raymond Fowler. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman this gentleman sought out Raymond Fowler at a MUFON meeting, which I think was happening in Massachusetts one year.
Okay.
And I forget the year. I think it was late 80s. I don't have the dates in front of me.
Right.
But he sought out Raymond Fowler, and he started to, try to talk to Ray about what he was experiencing. And Ray was trying to sign books and talk to other people, but when the gentleman brought up that he had a twin brother and he feels like they might have been abducted, Ray took notice and wanted to talk to the guy because he knew something about twins seemed to be of interest to extraterrestrials and other people that he's interviewed. So he started to take the claims more seriously, and he ended up doing very long-form interviews with all four gentlemen, and also helped them go through many months of hypnotherapy with a hypnotherapist that helped them recall what happened that night on the lake during that missing time, and that's when the full story started to come out.
And you've written some stuff about this story, I'm assuming. You've written some stuff about this, huh?
I have, yeah. I covered it in my book UFOs Over Maine. Raymond Fowler, who's an amazing author in his own right, actually wrote an entire book about this encounter.
Wow.
So what I covered was
a snippet,
obviously a small portion of what the intensity of what he covered. But in my book, though, I have a lot of the transcripts of the hypnotherapy sessions, which are haunting. And what they uncovered with these four guys is that, it's that prototypical alien abduction where they are having medical experiments done on them. A machine was lowered onto their torsos, and blood and semen and nails and hair samples were all taken. And when they discussed the process of the semen being taken, they all felt very much like it was sexual assault. It was not pleasant. It was not a good experience whatsoever. And a couple of them were really angry, and they felt that they were taken advantage of. And so these experiences were really intense. And Raymond Fowler really went out of his way to speak with friends and families and even coworkers and bosses to see how these guys were in their lives, to try to really paint a picture of these were really normal, regular people that had an extraordinary experience, and he didn't think they were making up anything. He was convinced that it was a real encounter. And the way he documented it was so fascinating that I couldn't help but believe them as well, Fascinating case.
Yes, it is, actually. I mean, that is probably one of the more fascinating cases, that's come up in the region. Now, as we know, back about 3 years ago, the government released information and said UFOs, or what their new name, UAB, which you won't hear that much from me. I'm not a big fan of using that terminology, UAB, does exist, and they released 160 sightings. Now, that was the original release. They're still hiding it, and I don't know why. Do you think have you come up with any reason why they would still be hiding this? Because you can have 160 UFO sightings just on the New Hampshire seacoast, never mind throughout the whole world.
Right. Yeah, why they would still be concealing it, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me, other than there's still secrets they want to keep. But why? I don't know. I don't know if it's because aliens are in fact real, and maybe they are, have contracts with them, and they can't speak about it. They have NDAs or something with the aliens. I don't know. It's certainly strange. But what's really great about all of this stuff coming out is, even though the government hasn't admitted that UFOs are real, it seems as though at least people in Congress are willing to listen to UFO experiencers now and listen to them publicly and ask really poignant questions, which is really fascinating and interesting to watch and to keep track of. But again, nothing has been admitted. A lot of people will haphazardly say, the government has admitted UFOs are real and nobody cares. And that's not really what happened. The government hasn't admitted anything. They're just more willing to listen to people publicly, which is nice, but they haven't admitted anything.
No.
Some of the whistleblowers that have come out are saying extraordinary things, but there hasn't been any proof or anything provided with those extraordinary claims, so I wish that would come to fruition, and hopefully it will sometime, but
right.
With disclosure and all this stuff coming out, I'm not holding my breath. I choose to interview and talk to and sometimes befriend experiencers. I want to collect their stories, and if they let me, I'll tell them publicly, either with the written word or on my podcast, or I'll tell them public event or something. But if they don't want me to share it, I won't.
Right.
But I think it's good to these stories for like historical record and
right. Well,
and it's interesting stuff.
Correct, and it's always good to have all these backup records. But I had talked to Mike Stevens about this a couple times and other UFO people. All right, what I was hoping, and Mike was hoping the same thing. So you have the Allegheny issue that you just talked about, and of course Mike talks about Benny and Bonnie Hill, which we're not going to really get into because we've talked about them so much on the show. It's you can only talk for so long. But what would be interesting would be, okay, what was going on in the Allegheny area weeks before and weeks after the incident? Same with the incident in Exeter. And I know there was a big celebration over Labor Day weekend, but same with the incident in Exeter, which really was in Exeter, as we both know. It was Kensington, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there UFO sightings before the incident or after the incident? That's what I would like to see.
Absolutely, there were, and it was happening over the largest military base in Maine. Before and after, and almost during. Some of those dates almost line up with some of the dates at this Air Force base. It's called Loring Air Force Base, and it was an operation. I think the construction began in 1947, and it ran all the way until 1994. That's when the doors closed.
So where is Loring Air Force Base in Maine? For our people who don't, I don't even know where that one is, and I'm pretty familiar with Maine.
Sure, it's almost at the tip of Maine. It's in Limestone, and Limestone is just a bit south of like Fort Kent. So you're almost to Canada at that point.
All right, so it's on the Canadian border. All right, because they also had Pease Air Force Base going at the same time, I believe, right?
Oh yeah, Pease was going on in New Hampshire.
Yeah,
I believe at the same time, and Loring actually had B-52 bombers that were outfitted with nuclear weapons, and there was a nuclear weapons storage area as well. And the base, numerous times, starting in the 50s, and basically continued until it closed, were numerous UFO encounters. And oftentimes the UFOs would be seen over the nuclear weapons area.
Right.
And they're very interesting. But yeah, and those, that was just maybe an hour north of the Allagash abductions. And, so were they similar vehicles that were being seen? It's possible.
Oh, anything is possible. I mean,
sure.
When we're dealing in this stuff, you have to look at every possibility and everything else. And you actually brought up something that I can actually find some people to talk about. Before we get into this, though, I forgot to ask you a question. When was your first UFO experience?
When was my first?
Yeah.
My first was, I was quite young. I was 4 years old, and I was in northern Maine. I was actually just probably 25 minutes from that Loring Air Force Base. And it was 1983, I believe. And something had woken me up in the middle of the night. And when I say middle of the night, I'm 4 years old. I don't know if that's 9 p.m. or 3 a.m., but I had been sleeping and something woke me up. And I was trying to figure out what it was. And then I started hearing light taps at my window.
Okay.
So my eyes went to the window and I started to see the sky light up. And I was like, oh, it's a thunder and lightning storm. And the taps hitting my window was rain. And what woke me up was probably thunder. So I kneeled up in my bed, thunder and lightning storm. And I was seeing the little flashes of lightning. But after a little while, there was this really disturbing lightning bolt. And it would be like if I were to ask you to draw a lightning bolt, you would draw that jagged yellow line,
Yes.
That's how my adult mind remembers it. But it was stuck in the sky, almost like it was sticking out of a cloud or something. And even at 4 years old, I knew you saw lightning in just a split second and then it was gone. But this lightning bolt stayed stuck in the sky, and there was electricity coming off of it, and there was booms associated with it. And the next thing I remember was just waking up in the morning. Don't remember anything else. I went to the bathroom. I was leaving the bathroom and walking back to my bedroom. And as I'm walking down the hall towards my bedroom, I can see out my bedroom windows. And the lightning bolt was still there. And I thought that was crazy. So I ran downstairs to get my dad, and I brought him upstairs to show him. And when I went to show him, it was gone. So I was trying to explain to him about the thunder and lightning and the storm and all that. And he was just kind of like, doing the dad thing, like patting my head, and be like, okay, buddy.
Yeah.
But I must have been really, I was pretty insistent because he had to like kneel down and get on my level, put his hands on my shoulders. He said, buddy, like it didn't even rain last night. I don't know what you're talking about. And, I wasn't thinking UFOs at 4 years old. I was just like, well, that's weird,
Right.
And the next shiny thing caught my attention, and I forgot all about it.
Right.
A couple weeks later, I'm getting woken up in the middle of the night again, and it's my dad that's waking me up, and he's bringing me downstairs, and I can see that my mom is putting my sister into her winter clothes, and then she does the same to me, and then my dad scoops me up, and we all walk outside. And again, to me, this is the middle of the night. I'm like, what the hell is going on? But it's so cold because it's northern Maine in the winter. It's so cold. I have my head tucked into his chest. And he keeps telling me, we're outside now. And he keeps telling me to look up, buddy, look up. And so I finally take my head out of his chest and I look up. And I'm seeing these really cool colors of like red and green and like ribbons of light. And it's the Aurora Borealis, the northern light.
Oh, cool.
And it's the only time in my life I've ever seen them. And I feel like those two things happening so close created like this core memory that weird stuff happens in the sky, and I should probably pay attention, And I've been paying attention ever since then.
Well, I mean, you know me as Essex County Ghost Project, right? But I've also done some UFO stuff, not comparatively what you've done, no. Bob Mcdermott actually runs the UFO arm. He's got his own UFO group, and we've got him working with Essex County. But one night, there was three of us driving in a car on North Beach in New Hampshire. You know where the swampland is over the ocean on Route 1A heading to Portsmouth, like in the Rye area?
I think I do, yeah.
This big, humongous thing came right over the car. And it was all red, orange, all these different lights. Now, one person in the car said, "Oh, that's not a UFO, Tom. That's a, what are those things called? A drone." This was a pretty big drone, okay? This was just, if I had one of those windows that opened up at the top of your car and I stood up, I could actually touch the bottom of this thing.
Jeez.
No damage to the car at all. And it went over the swamp, and then, the tree line that you can see from the road, it's all swamp, and then there's trees. It dropped. Now, it just dropped out of sight. So I called a friend of mine, and he's like, Tom, the official on that is it was a drone, but you take that for what it's worth. Okay, I got it. And then many moons ago, we were coming back from Ossipee. It must have been about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, and I was wide awake. So, it was a day trip, right? And this light went right across the sky, nice and slow, and then disappeared. Another time coming out of the North Country later at night, because before I got super busy in life, I'd pick a day, take a whole day off, pick an old truck route through New Hampshire or Maine or Vermont, and drive it from one end to the other, and then drive home. Stop for lunch and dinner and look at the historical sites along the way. And, of course, stop at a couple cemeteries, because that's what I like to do.
Yeah.
So on the way back, going by Santa's Village in Jefferson, so I'm coming down south, 16. You know where 16 and 302 meet up there?
I do, yeah.
Right across the intersection, you saw two shaped UFOs. These were straight lines, though. They looked like hot dog shaped.
Wow.
And then in what I've called the Sandown Triangle, I went to a wedding there a couple of years ago. My former executive at a TV station, the ED, the exec, she was getting married. She wanted no cameras at this wedding, and she was not a big fan of the paranormal. She didn't believe in it. She didn't believe in UFOs. I think a lot of it scared her. I'm not sure about belief. I think it was more she was afraid of it. But a lot of people are. So, I respect that. I'm sitting there watching the wedding, and two hot dog-shaped UFOs just flew right across the sky. Wow. It was quite interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I want to jump a little. You said something earlier with the Allegheny incident, okay, where they were taking, this is an adult show. They're taking, the men said they had semen taken from them. Is that correct? I heard you say that.
Yeah.
Okay. So years ago, I interviewed two women who are ufologists themselves in their own right. And they're from northern Maine, too. We're not going to use their names. But I'll tell you off the air. You know who they are. I'm guarantee you know who these two people are. They have a UFO support group similar to Mike Stevens.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do know who they are.
Okay. I knew you would. And she actually said on one of my shows, one of the two sisters, they're twin sisters, and they've been abducted or contacted, whatever you want to use, because everybody's words are different. And one of them she believes she was impregnated. Do you believe yourself, from the research you did, that we have aliens living among us? If you don't want to answer that, you don't have to.
I can only answer it from my experience and, of course, my beliefs. So whatever I say certainly isn't what people should believe as the truth. But I find it difficult to believe in these hybrid births.
Okay.
But with that said, I have read and talked to some compelling people that claim it. And I can't, I can't say that they're lying because they were so compelling and so believable, but I do have trouble wrapping my head around it. So I'm open to it. I guess I haven't seen or heard the definitive thing that makes me a believer, but it's certainly interesting and it's certainly possible is my short answer.
Well, no, that's actually a good answer. It's nice to hear. I like everybody's opinion on the ufology, what they think of that, because there is there's plenty of shows that talk about it. I mean, I've talked to these two women in depth because I know them very well and I trust them, and they're very good friends of mine. But I've seen on other UFO shows on TV the similar thing where they're starting to lean more towards this. So it's always interesting to hear what people have to say about that in the UFO world. That's why I asked the question. So But so how old were you again when you had your first UFO experience?
I was around 4 years old or
4
so.
years old. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, and you've always lived in Maine most of your adult life, it sounds like.
Yeah, I did live in Boston for a little while, but it was short-lived. But and I've lived all around the state of Maine, but yeah, mostly a Mainer boy.
Oh, okay. Now, on another podcast, which I listened to, we're going to bounce back real early in life. You had an interesting childhood and upbringing.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that really interests me. I've known you a while, and I was, like, blown away by it. I'll be honest with you.
Well, I guess it depends on exactly what you're talking about. Is it like a little visitor I used to have type of thing?
Well, that, and then where your family came from and everything like that.
Yeah, well, my mom is from northern Maine, and my dad is from Millinocket, Maine, which is still north, but it's not really considered northern Maine for, like, Mainers, if you will. But my mom is from, the Eagle Lake, Fort Kent area. And, yeah, it was an interesting childhood living in northern Maine. My mom grew up in what seemed like a haunted house, and she would tell me stories, and she wouldn't just tell me stories to scare me. Like, I was seeking them out from her. I would beg her to tell me scary stories, and she would tell me stuff that happened at the house that she grew up in. But the house that I grew up in, at a very young age, I think this was after my UFO experience, from what I remember. So I was probably 6, 7, 8 when this was going on, but I would have, like, this nightly visitor, and it happened for quite a while, like over a year. And it wasn't every night, but it was often. And it kind of always happened the same way. But this figure would stand in my doorway, and it was a very large, imposing figure, much larger than my father. And, my father isn't a big guy. He's 5'10", and this was a behemoth. Like, it took up the whole door frame. And it would stand in the doorway and stare at me. And I could tell, I couldn't really see what it looked like. And sometimes it was just an impression, like, see it in my mind's eye sometimes, but then other times I could see it with my eyes, but it would be kind of more like shadow person-esque, but I could kind of see what they looked like in my head. Okay. And they were an older gentleman, like in their 50s or 60s or something, and they had, like, a white beard, and they were drunk. And I could almost smell and taste the alcohol. It was so strong. Oof. And eventually they would make their way, and eventually they'd make their way to my bed and stand right on the side of my bed and look down at me. And then it got to the point where it would lean over my bed, and its face would be right in my face, and it was just so angry. And I could tell it was angry at me. Well, I think me. I just knew it was so angry, and it was very directed in my direction. And I also had thoughts of, like, it wanted to touch me, like, in a bad way. Okay. And, so it would happen. This would last maybe 10, 15 minutes. Like, nothing actually touched me, but I would get the feeling that it wanted to, but, I was never touched. But it would go away after 10 or 15 minutes, and I would get up and run into my parents' room and sleep in between my mom and dad for a while, until I woke up, and my mom or dad would usually walk me back to my bed after a couple hours or something, And, this went on for like a year, and it was just always the same. So I figured, in my later years, I didn't know then, but in my later years, I figured that it would be some sort of residual haunting. And it didn't really start until my dad built me this bedroom from a walk-in closet. I used to share a bedroom when I was really young with my sister. Yeah. As I started getting older, I guess I started complaining and wanted my own room. So we had this walk-in closet at the end of this hallway. And it was just enough to, like, bed in and a dresser, and my dad kind of made it up into a bedroom for me. So we really didn't start until I was in that room by myself. And so I'm wondering if maybe that room was a place where bad things used to happen, years ago there. I don't know. But it seemed residual.
Right. So what town was this in?
This was in Fort Kent.
Oh, okay. So way up north.
Yeah.
And it was an old house or a newer house?
No, it was an old house, and it was really actually an apartment building, but like a duplex. There were just 2 apartments, and my dad owned the whole thing, and he out the second apartment to other people. I don't know if it was always an apartment. That's interesting. I've never actually really done research on the place. Isn't that weird?
Yeah. What was it like in the what was it, late 18, early 1900 structure?
I would say, if anything, 1900s. I don't think it was 1800s by any means, but maybe early 1900s. I could see that. Okay. It had a dirt cellar, and there was a wood stove in the dirt cellar. So I don't know if that helps to date it by any means. Plus, I could talk to my dad. He might know. He might remember like how old it was.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. That was real interesting. So you've had UFO and paranormal experience.
Yeah, and I've even had some cryptid experiences.
Oh, you did?
I've seen some weird creatures, yeah.
So
not often.
Okay.
But it's happened twice that I can remember. And my dad's a pretty big skeptic. He always supports what I do, but he's a big skeptic himself. But he even had an experience in that same house that I had that weird shadow person.
So what did your dad have happen there?
Well, okay, this is really weird, and in my opinion, it leans more towards extraterrestrial, but I don't know.
Right.
My dad, till this day, he's like, I don't know if this is or not, but the way I hear it after talking to so many witnesses, it sounds like an experience and not a dream. But anyway, he wakes up in the middle of the night, and it's almost like he's in a vacuum of sound. Like sound is really, really muffled. Okay. He's having a hard time hearing anything. But there's a cat. We've always had cats growing up. And the cat had come up to the side of the bed, and it was looking at my father while my father was sitting up in bed. And my dad could tell that the cat wanted him to follow it. Mm-hmm. So the cat starts to walk off and leave the bedroom, and my dad gets up and starts following it. And the cat goes downstairs, and it goes through the kitchen, and then it goes to the basement door. And the basement's locked, and the door's closed, but my dad can tell the cat wants to go down there and wants my dad to follow it down there. So my dad opens the basement door, and the cat goes down the stairs, and then it disappears. The cat's gone now, and he's just in the basement by himself. Mm-hmm. Well, there was this wood stove that was kind of like in this middle portion of the basement. And behind the wood stove was a brick wall on either side. And you could kind of walk on either side of the wood stove should you need to repair it or get to the pipes or whatever.
Yeah.
And beyond that, there was the tiniest bit of storage where you could put storm windows. It wasn't very, like, you couldn't fit back there as a person, but you could slide storm windows in there. Okay. And in fact, that's what my dad had stored back there. And so he's standing and he's looking at the wood stove. And behind the wood stove, in this storage area, he sees this 5 or 6 tall being, and it sticks his head out and peeks at him. And it's completely bald and it's green. Okay. And he's like, what the hell is that? And it sticks its head back, and then it sticks its head back out again to look at my dad, and then it sticks its head back behind the storage area. And that's all my dad remembers. And then, he just wakes up in the morning. And he told me that years, after it had happened. But that was a very strange experience to have.
Oh, I bet it was. I bet it was.
Yeah.
So you've had a few cryptid experiences, you said, huh?
Yeah. And this wasn't that long ago. One of them happened in the early 2000s, but this latest one was in February of 2020. And that seems like a lifetime ago because that was just before COVID hit and then the world changed, But it was February of 2020, and I live in the Bar Harbor area of Maine, and it was in a fairly early evening. It was like 6:45 p.m., and I was driving on some back roads, and I was going about 45 miles an hour. And there's, driving on the back roads, February in Maine at that time of night, nobody on the road.
Right.
And up ahead, about 300 yards up ahead, on the side of the road, I see like this 6-foot tall, I don't know what, a being of some sort, but it looks like it's made of twisted sticks.
Yeah.
It's got 2 legs and 2 arms, and it's got a head, and it has these 2 sticks sticking out of its head. They're not antlers, but they're sticking up like antlers, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
If you can picture Groot from the Marvel movies and Guardians of the Galaxy,
yeah,
kind of looked, tall and slender, but it was completely black, and it was really black. Like when my headlights hit it, it looked like it was like oily almost.
Right.
And on that particular road, there's ditches on either side of the road to help with, rainwater when it dumps on us. And I saw it take this exaggerated step from the side of the road over the ditch and into the woods, and it kept walking. So this all happened in like 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. And I'm like, what the hell was that?
Right.
And since I'm driving 45 miles an hour and it was like 300 yards ahead of me, I got to the area of where it walked into the woods pretty quickly. So I kind of slammed on the brakes and stopped in the middle of the road. Again, there's nobody coming, but there's also no place to park. So it's not like I can like get out and, go look. But I do stop in the middle of the road and I roll down my window because I wanted to see if I could hear it crunching on the snow, in the woods. And I couldn't hear anything. Wow. Just after like a moment of rolling my window down, my car became filled with this awful smell. And it was like rotting eggs or like death. It was awful. And I've heard about that in like Bigfoot sightings, it's really stinky. And sometimes in demonic encounters, you hear of like a really bad smell sometimes. But I've never experienced it myself. But it filled my car. Oh my God. It was February in Maine, but I had to drive with all 4 windows down just to try to get the smell out. It was awful. So I get home and I kind of write everything down because I didn't want to forget it because I'm also a researcher and investigator. I want to make sure I document it, but I'm also a human. So I'm like, what the hell did I see? And so I started doing some research on this particular area. I never really thought to do research of exactly right around where I live, so that was kind of interesting.
Right.
And I did find that there was a UFO encounter like in 95 or 96, just about a mile from where this happened. And these people were inside, and it was early evening again, and a light went on in their backyard, but they didn't have motion lights or anything. So they were like, what the hell is that? And I think the dad goes outside and, mom sees him looking up in the sky at something. And so the mom comes out and then the kid comes out and there's this huge UFO hovering over their house. And it's just really bright and it's shining down on their lawn in the backyard. And they look at it for a little bit and, from what they reported, it then took off. It was no sound. They didn't think that they had been abducted. There was no missing time or anything. But that was basically the encounter. And I thought that was interesting that happened right within the mile, of where I saw this weird creature, stick-figure thing.
No, it is real interesting, some of these creatures that are out there. I mean, you have Bigfoot, then you have, the smaller creatures like Bigfoot, but they're smaller.
The puckwudgies or whatever,
Well, no, what are they called? Puckwudgies were the devil's favorite demons. So, and back to this thing anyhow, but it's real hard to get some good evidence sometimes, but you've succeeded. How many books have you actually written?
We were trying to count earlier. It's like 6 or 7, but a couple of them were like companion pieces to some documentaries I made. So even though there are books, they're very short and different than a regular book. But yeah, I think there's 7 total, and I just put out a new one this year, and it's a 10th anniversary edition of my first book, which is UFOs over Maine. And that first book had about, 20, 25 encounters in it. But this new book, I added about 150 new or different encounters. A lot of them never before published. And I also completely rewrote the book. So all of the old encounters I wrote about, I, re-interviewed people. I found out more information. And so all of the stories have been expanded and rewritten. And it's quite the tome. It's over 400 pages and almost 200 encounters. So it's fascinating, the stuff that has happened in this state.
No, it is real fascinating what's going on. I mean, 20 years ago, I grew up in the 90s. I graduated class in 95. People wouldn't even talk about this stuff. Back in the 70s, it was even worse. They wouldn't talk about this stuff.
Right.
Today, we seem to be talking about it.
Sure.
Maybe because of all the shows and stuff, I don't know, but we're talking about it, which is good. But sometimes we have to actually watch what we talk about. I mean, you had an experience with a cryptid, but you don't even know if it was a Bigfoot or what it was at this point, correct?
Yeah.
But it was definitely a cryptid, because there's another word for Bigfoot. They're a little bit smaller. I'm drawing a blank on them. Up in New Hampshire, they have a different name for them. They're different colors too.
Okay.
But I mean, they're out there. We're definitely not the only race out there. There's definitely things out there. Whether they're in the sky or on the ground.
The two of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like just between the two of us, me and you, we've talked to so many people that have experienced crazy things. And then think of all the other researchers, investigators. I mean, there's so many people that are reporting things. And, do we believe them all? No. But even if 1% of them is telling the truth, I mean, that's crazy.
Hey, I just found a crazy story, and I need to find a guy from Maine to talk about this crazy story. I just lost it. WMTW, which is one of the main big news stations, reported today that the lobster saw its shadow. Do you know anything about that thing?
Yeah.
Can you explain that to our listeners? Because I never seen that before. I wasn't even going to talk about it, but I get an emergency flash on my phone. I'm like, news source from this? So what is it?
Yeah, it's silly. Yeah, it's silly, and it's very similar to the groundhog, but the lobster sees its shadow. Then, if it doesn't, I think we'll have kind of a longer summer. And if it does see its shadow, then winter's going to come a little bit early. And I think it did see its shadow, so they're saying we're going to get colder weather, sooner. And a lot of times, September for Maine, at least lately, like the last 10 years, September in Maine has been like the 4th summer month. Like even today was super hot. And, it's certainly getting colder. But the first half of October, you could still have 80-degree days. But then by the end of October, we might get our first sight of snowflakes, too. It's so strange how quickly it can turn over.
So what do they use, the same lobster every year? Or is it a different lobster?
No, I'm sure it's a different lobster every year. I couldn't imagine it's the same one. And I don't even know how long that's been going on. But yeah, it's a silly tradition, but it's kind of fun, but it's certainly silly.
It said 10 years. I did read a little bit about it. Real quick. It said 10 years.
Yeah. Well, it's silly, but it's kind of fun. And, and it's annoying that it said or because it saw its shadow, then there's winter's going to come early, so that's no fun for us. But
No,
what are you going to do?
There's not much, especially up in Maine.
Yeah,
Especially where
it
you're
comes
located.
Cryptids.
Yeah. Oh, so that was interesting. Thanks for stating that up for us on that one. I had never seen that before.
I don't know if I did too good of a job, but it's a fun little Maine tradition.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that Maine tradition. Now, you've traveled a few places doing this type of research, haven't you?
Oh, sure.
Where was your favorite place to travel?
Oh, my goodness. It was actually Loring Air Force Base, so it was further up the state.
Yeah.
But I went up there in 2017, and I spent the whole night on the base in the middle of the night. It's defunct.
Yeah.
They haven't done anything with the actual base itself. There are some businesses that are on the peripheral of the base, and they keep trying to move more businesses into those buildings, but it's northern Maine, so that's tough. But they keep trying, and some stuff comes and then some stuff goes. The Department of Defense has an accounting department up there, which is interesting.
Okay.
And but the base itself, they'll hold some concerts up there on the runway, and all that good stuff. But yeah, it's basically an abandoned and shut down Air Force base, and the housing area where all the men would and families would have their apartments. Now it looks like something out of The Last of Us or The Walking Dead. They're all decrepit,
right,
and windows are broken, and animals are running in and out, and it's overgrown, and there's lots of areas where the pavement's cracked, and stuff is growing in between the cracks, and these big hangars and other buildings are like bleeding rust. It's really friggin' cool. And if anybody can get up there and spend some time there, it's awesome. And you're not supposed to do this, but I even got my car going about 100 miles an hour on the runway because there's about 2 miles of runway. So that was.
Did you catch anything up there?
I did, yeah. So it was. I think it was around 1:30-ish in the morning, and been watching the sky for quite a while. And I was probably on my second hour of watching the sky, and it was drizzling, so there was low cloud coverage, which you might think is annoying, but if I were to see a light under the cloud cover, then it's not celestial, and it might be something.
Right.
So I ended up catching a light in the sky, and it was just this light, and it was hovering there, and it wasn't moving. And I was very human in that moment. I was just staring at it, probably with my jaw dropped. And I had this next to me. I had, night vision camera. I had a full spectrum camera, a parabolic mic, and this stuff sitting next to me. And I'm just sitting there like an idiot staring at this light. And then I realized I'm holding my cell phone. So I bring up the camera and I hit record. And my car is still running at this point. And I decide that I'm going to drive closer to this thing. I want it to be like right underneath it. And I let my foot off the gas, just slowly start rolling. And I roll about 5 feet. And in doing so, I don't know if it startled this thing or whatever the hell happened, but it did this weird shimmering, swirly thing. And it almost looks like a flame. And then it disappears. And I caught it all on camera.
Nice.
And it's on my YouTube channel if people want to check it out. It's it's not very impressive. I have a YouTube video on my channel that's called The UFOs at Loring Air Force Base. It's about 10 minutes long. If you don't want to watch the whole thing, just fast forward towards the end, and you can see a close-up of this video of what I caught. And I also screenshot it and played around with the colors, and it's a really weird shape.
Mm-hmm.
So people should check it out if they want to.
All right, so you got a YouTube page.
Yeah,
so if people want to check out your YouTube page, how do they do that?
They just type my name, Nomar Slevik, Nomar Slevik, into YouTube, and might pop up for them. Actually, I think it's actually called Slevik Stories now. I'm so sorry. I just changed it over.
So it's
Slevik
called.
Story.
So it's SLAVIKE. SLE.
That's
Yeah.
VIK, and then stories, because I share little stories on there. And but this Loring episode is about 10 minutes long, and I explain a little bit about an encounter at Loring. Then I talk about my investigation at Loring, and then I share what I caught on camera at the end of it. And it's a nice close up. It's pixelated because I'm zoomed way in, but it's compelling. It's really strange.
No, that is very strange. Now, you out on the circuit doing any talks coming up in the next couple of weeks or month? So if people want to come out and listen to you.
Yeah. In October, I'm going to be in a few different areas. I'm actually doing a thing at a private residence on October 12th. So if you know about it, and there's some people that are going to be showing up to that. So that's exciting. And later in October, I'm doing something that's called the Witch Walk, and that's in Bangor at the waterfront. And it's literally a bunch of witches get together, and they do this path around Bangor, Maine, and they end up at the waterfront, and I'll be set up there as a vendor, telling stories and selling my book. And so that'll be fun. And we're hoping that another event is going to come to fruition. Hopefully it does. It's something called Parafest, and if that happens, I'll be there as well. And I'll be, if it does happen, I'll also be giving a presentation. So that'll be fun.
No, we're going to make it happen. I may be back up in Maine yet. I'm trying to get Rhode Island booked, and it's been very difficult.
Oh, for sure.
For the Parafest. But if not, we'll come back up to Maine, because they've already called me 3 times. Kittery.
Oh, wow. Nice.
So I know they want it, but the question becomes, when. But no.
Yeah.
So you don't have any library talks or anything coming up?
Nothing scheduled yet. Oh, the Bangor Public Library in December. So it's a little ways away, but it'll be in December, and I can't even remember the date right now.
Maybe I'll take a ride up there, and if it's a day that I'm not doing Festival of Trees or anything, have some dinner with my cousins who live in Bangor, Maine, and then go listen to your talk, and then drive. What's that, about 3 hours north of Portland? Bangor is.
Yeah. Bangor is actually just about 2 hours north of Portland, so it's not too bad.
It's about a 5-hour ride for me. Yeah.
Yeah. It'll take a little while, the full trip. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a 5-hour ride. I'd still do it though. That would be fun. I want to thank you, Nomar. We're gonna actually have you back on soon. Because we didn't even get into your books. I mean, we talked a few weeks ago. We talked about one of your books with Mike Stevens.
That's okay.
But there's 6 other books you've published and done some great research. So we got to have you back on soon.
Anytime.
But no, this was a fun interview. So make sure you check out Nomar Slavik's YouTube page. You probably have a Facebook page too, where people can reach
for sure. Yeah, and people can just Google my name. It's a pretty unique name. So if you Google Nomar Slevik,
let's get the spelling right. So when people Google this thing, they get the right Nomar. So it's Nomar.
Yep.
And then SLEV.
Yeah, EVIK.
IK. Yes, that is a very unique name.
So you type that in, you'll find my books, and you'll find my podcast. I have a podcast, and it's called I Want to Believe, and I share stories on that as well. And we just did an episode on puck wedgies, but I've also done episodes like Eyed Kids and hauntings and Bigfoot and tons of stuff. And
I'll have to listen to your show on. I'm going to definitely listen to the show on Pudgewuckies, because I actually had to deal with one in Amesbury, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I did a private investigation in Amesbury, Massachusetts, and there was at least one. There looked like a Pudgewucky, but some people called it an elemental in my cemetery at Hilldale Cemetery. To me, it looked like a Pudgewucky. To somebody else, it looked like an elemental. So it was quite an interesting, scene over there. Somebody had seen it. I'd seen it. And their version of it, my version of it, But that's why this is the type of show we do, because everybody has their own versions, and we got to be open to what everybody does, because they spend a lot of time researching.
You definitely got to be open, and in my opinion, non-judgmental and kind, and truly listen to people.
Mm-hmm. And you've been doing this how long now, Noma?
For quite a while now. I believe this is, year 20, maybe even 25. I forget. It's been a while.
Wow. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, but it's been quite a while.
Yeah, righty. Well, I want to thank you for coming on, and we're going to definitely get you back. I want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight, this morning, afternoon, wherever you're listening in at. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I'm heading back to the crypt and to relax. And this is the Paranormal Zone. Good night, everybody. We'll talk soon. Good night.